to talk about her book, Haunted Prague. Just before we get started, we're going to do a few introductions, and I'll give you an overview of what Michele plans to talk about. She will be doing a short presentation this evening, and we'll be taking questions. You can drop them in the chat or the Q&A function if you're online. I will also be keeping an eye if you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube Live. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat over there. So please feel free to drop your questions in as they happen during the presentation. And when we get to the Q&A section, we'll share those with Michele, and she'll drop the knowledge on us and tell us what the answers are to all your burning questions about Prague and the supernatural. So just a little bit about Swamp Fox Bookstore for those of you who are not familiar with it. We opened in June of 2020. 3 book lovers, Amanda Zorni, Ursula Lanfear, and myself, realized our dream to open a small bookstore in Uptown Marion. The store is named after the city's namesake, General Francis Marion, whose nickname was the Swamp Fox. We quickly became known as a tiny shop with a big heart due to our community involvement. You can find us online at swampfoxbookstore.com and on Facebook and Instagram at under the handle Swamp Fox Bookstore. And tonight we are proud to welcome Michele Patrick. She has always loved a spooky tale, and her love affair with Prague's supernatural legends began with the stories of her Czechoslovak grandfather shared. And now that she knows there's no monsters under the bed, she is thrilled to be able to take the reader on a magical tour of the most ghostly cities in her book, Haunted Prague. A professional writer and award-winning speechwriter, Michele is a former United States National Collegiate Champion in public speaking and a Fulbright Scholar at the University of London. She has served as a speechwriter for the President's Cabinet, United States Senate, and the Presidents of the University of Pennsylvania and Georgetown. An avid traveler, she has visited 37 countries on 6 continents, and she has visited Prague many times and lived there in 1991, looking for monsters and spirits, not just under the bed, but around every corner, on every street and square. Her book, Haunted Prague, is not the usual collection of folktales or fairy tales, but only of supernatural legends, for which Prague is unsurpassed anywhere in Europe and possibly the world. All the writing is original, and she's included the newest legends, such as those associated with the fall of communism, which are not usually found in other books on Prague, but all have a historical reference. And what she hasn't included are legends recently discovered by restaurants and hotels to increase tourist traffic. And if anybody attended our event last year, you know that often happens in tourist-based cities. Her research included oral interviews, much reading of source materials, especially history, web searches, and even taking ghost tours. And of course, her own family background. She hopes that when you read this book, it will help you discover a few fascinating tales, some sinister, some illuminating, and some even a little funny. But don't think Stephen King. Think more Brothers Grimm. She hopes it provides an extensive description of the legend's location, and including all the major tourist attractions to guide the visitor or armchair tourist through a unique tour of Prague. In fact, if you read the stories in order, one site will take you to the next. So you can easily use her book as a guidebook. And her goal is to make the reader feel as though they're in Prague, whether or not they've ever visited the city, and share a little bit of the unknown and intriguing Czech or Czechoslovak history when it adds to the story. So welcome, Michele. We're so happy to have you with us tonight.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And thank you all for joining me tonight for this conversation about Haunted Prague, both the book and the city. You know, native son Franz Kafka once called Prague the dear little mother with claws. Because once you get to know her, you will fall hopelessly in love with her, but you will never be able to escape her grasp. And sometimes you may even notice a sense of something sinister in the air. I think the photos and stories that I'm going to share with you in a few moments, almost all of them from my book, Haunted Prague, will definitely prove why that is true. So what I want to do tonight is before we begin our conversation, to take you on a brief virtual tour of Prague. I want to acquaint or reacquaint you with the beauty of this magical city and give you a flavor of its mysterious legends. And with that, let's begin our journey through Haunted Prague. Oh, yeah. All right, Terry, can you see that? Terry?
Not yet. I haven't seen any. I'm not seeing it yet, Michele.
Okay, hold on. For some reason, I know we did this the other day. We were having a little technical problem. Sorry. Let me. Right, hold on.
So amazing to see so many people from all over the country here.
Yes, and I'm sorry, we are having a problem. We did this the other day, and I'm having a problem bringing this up. Hold on.
Take your time, Michele.
Thank you. Let us try again. Okay, hold on. Can you see it now?
No, I'm not seeing. Are you getting a message or an error of any kind when you try to bring it up?
No.
Are you able? I was going to ask if you were able to email it to me quick, and I can try sharing it from my screen.
All right. And hold on. Let me see if I can do that. I don't know what is causing the problem this time, since we had no problem before. I'm hitting present, if I may. Terry, I'm hitting the present to audience as we are, and it is not coming up.
There's nothing popping up saying share screen?
We've got share screen, and when I go there, I'm not getting anything.
Okay. Let's, are you able to go, do you want me to just start asking questions? How would you like to best proceed, Michele?
Give me one more second, and perhaps we should ask our questions first, and then let's see what I can do here. I do not understand why this is showing. So if you want to ask me while I'm trying to get this up.
So what is the day in the life of Michele Patrick, the author, look like? I know when we got on some morning, or just a little bit ago, you were talking about that you have a day job. So how do you balance writing and that day job?
And I'm laughing because my day job is also writing. And I was going to joke that I think my average day is actually a little boring because they're pretty much the same. I am a speechwriter by profession, and so my average day would be a work day, a weekday. I get up, I prepare myself for work, I try to do a little bit of yoga, a little meditation, and then I get to my day job, which is writing speeches, currently for the administrator for the Centers of Medicare and Medicaid Services. And I will spend the day writing, researching, and yes, going to Zoom meetings because fortunately I get to work from home. If I have time during the day, I will try to get out for a walk. And if I really have time, we'll try to sneak a few moments to read and to have a really good cup of tea.
Oh, good cup of tea. That sounds amazing.
At the end of the work day, my husband will come home, we'll have dinner. And that is usually when, after dinner, where I will find time for myself to do my writing.
Mm-hmm.
I try to write at least an hour a day. Sometimes I get caught a little short. And then after that, getting myself ready for the next day. But the one thing I always do before going to bed is I read. So if I have to think of 3 touchstones for my day, which is pretty much every day, writing, reading, and tea.
Sounds amazing. I'll replace the coffee with tea, or the tea with coffee for me. But those are my 3 touchdowns. So tell us a bit about your book, Haunted Prague. You said when we were kind of getting ready for this evening, you had said you were inspired by stories that your grandfather told you, but also based on an experience you had in the city.
Yes, I fell in love with Prague from an early age because my grandfather would tell me stories. My mother was also born there, so I was also always a great lover of Prague. But I saw it for the first time when I was a student in 1986. So I am dating myself. And I went there, and it was still under the communists then, but it was still the most amazing city. And I realized that I wanted to write about it. I wanted to tell its story, but I wanted to tell about it in a different way. And I thought of the supernatural stories of Prague because, as you said, I've always loved a spooky tale. And the thing about that is, I wanted not just to tell the stories of Prague, but I wanted to tell the story of Prague through its legends. And I'll get to the supernatural experience in a moment. And one of the reasons that works so well is that legends, probably more than any other medium, really do speak to the culture and atmosphere of a place because they speak to a people's dreams and hopes, experiences, and aspirations. And this is really true in Prague because, given its history, legends offer a unique window on the city's spirit, people, history, on its very soul. And the thing that sort of, shall we say, put it over for me is that when I was in Prague, that very first time, I was walking through the city. And I was in the old town square. And all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't alone. Now, I joke that's because it was under the communism. I may have been followed by the secret police, but I just felt like I wasn't alone. And I honestly felt there's no other way to describe this, as though the place was haunted. And I couldn't put my finger on it. Was I feeling that way because of the ghost of Prague? Because of all of the people who had been suppressed under communism, but I just felt like I was walking through the city with others. And that, I have to say, I truly believe was a supernatural experience. It's the only one that I've ever had, but that sort of was the final straw that made me say, I want to write this book to tell Prague's story through its legends.
So in your research, did you find out if there are any ghost stories that are associated with the square?
Oh, there's quite a number of ghost stories associated with the square. The man who created the famous astronomical clock, and hopefully I will be able to show that to you, who was blinded for his trouble by the magistrates of the city because they didn't want him to make a more beautiful clock for another city. The 27 Czech patriots who rebelled against the Austrians, who were beheaded in the square, and every year on the anniversary of their execution, they march from this Our Lady of Teen Church across the square carrying their heads. So so maybe I wasn't alone in the square. There are quite a number of ghost stories associated with it.
That's awesome. It's so cool.
So please keep. I'm still trying to get you the slides. We will see this. So if you just want to keep asking me questions, we can do the conversation part before we do the virtual journey through Prague.
So why is Prague so haunted?
Now that is a great question. And I think it's for 4 reasons. The first, and if you would see the pictures, you would probably agree with me, is the city itself. With its winding, dark Gothic lanes and its beautiful pastel palaces and its soaring castle on the hill, it really is more surreal than real. And it's a city that actually boasts a unique pagan temple area, pagan cemeteries, portals to hell, and not 1, but 3 Faust houses. Now, the second reason is that Praguers have long believed in supernatural forces and figures. Ask anyone in this city and they'll probably tell you that Prague was founded by the mythical pagan princess and priestess called Libuše. She apparently one day went into a trance and, pointing in the distance, saw a city whose glory reached the stars, in her own words. She then directed her followers to that spot and told them to build. And that's where, of course, today we have Prague. Now, the third reason happens to do with an actual historical ruler, the Emperor Rudolf II. In the 16th century, he made Prague the magical capital of Europe. He brought astronomers and astrologers, mystics and magicians and madmen from every corner of the continent to his capital on the Vltava River. There they tried to turn base metals into gold and discover the secrets of the universe. More than any other reason, I think it's due to Rudolf that Prague was enveloped in the mists of legends, a mist that has not evaporated even today. And the final reason is a contemporary of Rudolf, a man named Rabbi Judah Loew. And Rabbi Judah Loew created the Golem, or Prague's own Frankenstein monster. And which again, hopefully we'll be able to see in a moment. And although Loew was the leading Talmudic scholar of the Renaissance and the chief rabbi of Bohemia, he lived at a time when Prague was considered the epicenter for the study of the mysterious Kabbalah, and that became associated with him. And so today he's mostly remembered for his supposed supernatural powers and for his creation of the Golem, or Prague's own Frankenstein monster, which added that final supernatural layer.
I've read The Genie and the Golem by Helen Wacker, so I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story. All right, I'm trying to... if you want to continue with a few more, as I said, I'm having trouble even, and I'm sending this to you, but go ahead.
Okay. Why are legends so important to Praguers?
Another really good question. Prague sits at the epicenter of Europe, and for 1,000 years, wars and invasions and dictators have washed over it. So the people had to believe that their own innate values and virtues, their own moral compass, would ensure their survival as a nation, allowing them not just to survive, but thrive. Which is why so many of Prague's legends are dark, but they really hinge on values and virtues, that moral compass, such as kindness, honesty, integrity, courage. If you hold on to these, you not only will survive, you will thrive. And this was a very important message for the people of Prague, and one that legends certainly reinforce for them.
It's amazing to see how legends stick around across centuries and through families. Do you have a favorite story that your grandfather used to share?
Okay, first of all, I'm going to ask you, can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I'll answer that question, and forgive me, I do not know why. I am blaming you.
We see the individual slides right now, so I don't know if you're going to go into slideshow mode so we can see the slideshow. Awesome. Yay!
But I will answer that question, and I will say I think the reason we could not see the slideshow is because ghosts, I'm joking, often attack my presentation. When I was doing
I'm up for any explanation.
When I was doing a virtual presentation for the University of Southern Missouri, all of a sudden, for no explicable reason, the last 5 minutes, suddenly it just cut out and we could not bring it back to save our lives. And they believed it was the ghosts that were doing that. So what I can do is I can save that answer for after we're done. You can ask me about my grandfather and legends, and we can take you finally through the slideshow. So thank you for your forbearance, but I, said a little prayer for the ghost to go away, and I think he or she got the message. So anyway, now to begin what I had hoped to begin a few moments ago, but hopefully maybe by doing a little bit of that discussion first about legends, about why Prague is so haunted, maybe it gave a little bit better background to see the slides. So anyway, first I want to show you where we're going to go tonight. We're going to start in the middle, and that is with Charles Bridge, which is the red bridge you see over the Vltava River. After that, we're going to go to the right bank, starting in the Old Town, which is directly across from the bridge, then heading north to the Jewish town, and then south to the New Town. And there we're going to focus mainly on Wenceslas Square, which is that large rectangle you see outlined in green and red.
Michelle,
Now,
can I jump in quick here?
Yes.
We're seeing the individual slides, so I don't know if there's a way for us to see just the map slide that you're talking about.
Oh, you are? Okay,
Yeah.
hold on. Let me stop sharing for a moment. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Wow. Yeah, this is not. Sorry. Yeah, you should have been able, because I started I started from the beginning, and you should. Okay. I started from. What are you seeing now?
I'm just gonna give it a minute. Hopefully, it will jump back in and let us see them. Or we've jinxed it now.
Okay, let me get out of it again and see, because that is amazing, since I've never had that happen where it did not go into the beginning of slideshow mode. All right, let's see what we can do. Let's get out of it again. Okay, hold on. Are you still seeing every slide or no slide at all?
No slide at all right now.
Okay, hold on. We'll try this one more time. Okay, let's see. I'm assuming you're not seeing it again.
No, we're not. Do you want me to just keep asking questions? I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, let's see if I can get this back again. Yes.
So would you like to share the story that was a favorite that your grandfather used to tell you?
My grandfather's favorite story was probably The Ghostly Organist, which takes place inside St. Vitus Cathedral. And it was about a Jewish man who converted to Catholicism. But on his deathbed, he was afraid that he had denied his people and desecrated his heritage. So he asked his bishop to be allowed to leave the Catholic Church and be buried with his own people. The bishop didn't allow that. The man kept silent, and when he died, they found a note that said he had renounced the new religion and wanted to be buried with his own people. Unfortunately, he still hasn't found rest. Every night he sleeps in the Jewish cemetery, and I have some lovely pictures of that. And then, the first ray of dawn, he walks down to the Vltava River, and there is a boat waiting for him, piloted by a ghostly phantom. He silently rows him across the river, and on the other side, he climbs up to St. Vitus. He slips inside while no one sees him, and he plays the organ during the day, waiting to be found by anyone who has the courage to search for him. As dusk begins to fall, He then travels down the hill again, and the boat mysteriously reappears and ferries him back across the river, and he once again sleeps in the old Jewish cemetery. For whatever reason, that was my grandfather's favorite story.
I love that.
And that's it. I wish I could show you the pictures of this.
Well, you said it's, I just did a quick Google search. You said St. Vitus, right?
St. Vitus.
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 I think I found a picture on Google. Let me see if I can share here. So everybody could at least see what the cathedral looks like.
Yeah, see, I can see your screen. But that is St. Vitus. And that is, and I can't even, for some reason, send you my presentation. That is the side of the cathedral with the great bell tower, where sometimes the priest apparently also goes into the bell tower as well.
It's beautiful building.
Mm-hmm. It was started in 1344, and it wasn't completed until 1929, and it is considered one of the finest Gothic cathedrals in Europe. And it's famous. Its interior is famous for its stained glass windows, which again I'm hoping to show you. I wish I could figure out what this, since we went through our run through the other day perfectly, and for some reason it is not cooperating. Let's see. I'm going to try one more time, and it just does not.
And there's no error message or anything popping up for you at all?
No, unfortunately, there is not. But when I try to share it, it does not even. It allows me to share other things that it's showing, including my email account. But it's not allowing me to share the slides.
Oh, frustrating. So when we were talking before we got started today, I was sharing that last year we did an event with two women that had written a book about ghost stories, specifically focused on women and ghost stories and legends here in the United States, and why our culture is so focused on women and women ghost stories and hauntings and supernatural events. And you said you had a young man when you visited Iowa at one point ask you a really interesting question about the history of witches and witch trials in Europe or in Prague. Can you share us a little bit about that? Because I found your answer to that question very intriguing and so very different from what we experienced with our history here in the States.
Mm-hmm. He wanted to know about witch trials and witch burnings in Prague. And I told him it was probably one of the best questions I had ever received, because there weren't any. And one, as I said, from that little bit about why Prague is the most haunted of places, because it really was the magical capital of Europe. But it's deeper than that. And there really is a divide between Catholic Europe and very Protestant evangelical Europe. Now, I'm painting with a broad brushstroke, but what you find is that you have very few witch burnings in Catholic Europe. The Catholic Europe had its own problems, the Inquisition, and etc. But the Catholic Church was much more focused on the next world. In evangelical Europe, the more evangelical a country, the more they believed that they were trying to create God's kingdom on earth. And what we find is that the worst witch trials were in Scotland at the time of about Henry Knox, which apparently was, at that time, was probably the most evangelical place on earth. There, eventually that would come down to England, and it was the same mindset that the Pilgrims and the Puritans brought over to the U.S. And the reason that you have so many witch burnings in uber evangelical, in the way that it was originally meant, evangelical circles, is that the evangelicals believed that they were creating God's community on earth. We know this from their own pilgrims, from our own pilgrims. And how do you destroy God's community on earth? Well, obviously the devil would want to do that and would send his minions, that being witches, to destroy God's community on earth, which is why you have horrible witch burnings, in Salem or in Scotland. But you really don't have it so much in places like Prague. To the best of my knowledge, there was never a single witch burning in all of Prague or its environs. And if anything, part of that too is that Prague has so been in love with everything mystical and magical that if anything, they embraced that. As again, they had a king, an emperor, who brought magicians and warlocks and such from every corner of Europe to Prague. So that was a really good. As I said, it was the best question I had ever been asked.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's interesting to see how religion and different cultures are affected by those things, and how that is reflected in our own oral traditions. So what are some of your, like, you must visit or should visit these places in Prague from your book? Like, where would you, like, if somebody only had 24 hours in the city, what would be some of your top places to visit?
That is a difficult yet great question. And the book does cover all of, shall we say, the major tourist attractions. But if I would have to say, one, Charles Bridge, which is the #1 tourist attraction in Prague. Two, the Hradčany, or Prague Castle, which is, in the castle complex, contains gardens and monasteries and churches. And of course, St. Vitus Cathedral sits right in the middle of Prague Castle. The old town square with its centerpiece, the world famous astronomical clock, and the Jewish cemetery and the old new, odd name, I know, the old new Jewish synagogue, which dates from 1270 and which has continuously held services for over 750 years. It is the oldest functioning synagogue in Europe. And the only time it didn't have services was during 4 years of Nazi occupation, from 1941 to 1945. And a personal favorite is there's an incredible garden. It's considered the finest Baroque terrace garden in Europe, which is in the lesser town, or Malá and it's called the Vertba Garden. Again, thick photos, we can see them. And that would be a personal favorite that isn't always on most people's tourist itineraries.
What are some of your favorite ghost stories from those locations?
My favorite ghost story from the castle, from the St. Vitus, which sits in the castle, is, and again, I was going to tell this at the end, the story of the Cursed Crown and the Reichsprotector. Now, there's a chapel of St. Wenceslas where the saint is buried, and although it's hard to see, there's a small door that leads to where the Bohemian crown jewels are kept. And the most sacred object in it is the crown of St. Wenceslas. And probably not surprising, a frightening legend developed around it, that any imposter who only put the crown on his head or her head, even momentarily, would soon die a terrible death. Well, that curse was last tested, or perhaps proven, in 1942. Reinhard Heydrich, he being the main architect of the Holocaust, was appointed by Adolf Hitler as the Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia. And he, yes, once did put the crown on his head and left. Only a few days later, he was gunned down by Czechoslovak commandos. He was the only high-ranking Nazi to be assassinated during the war. Curse? Coincidence? I'll let you decide.
That one kind of gave me chills, Michelle.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to tell you more as we go through. And I know this is very unusual, but, and I do see some friends on the line. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm actually going to answer a question that I see.
Yeah, I was going to ask that one, so go for it.
The story behind the pin you're wearing, is it from Prague? It is, in fact, yes, from Prague. And it features, I'm going like this to show, Czech crystal. As many people may know, honestly, Czech crystal is probably the oldest crystal industry in the world. And they produce the finest crystal anywhere. So I got this, and I tend to wear this on my book events. Even usually they tend to be around Halloween, but I decided I had to wear it today.
It's beautiful.
So I'm going to try one more time here, and then I may actually call in some technical help that is sitting in the next room, because I'd hate for you not to see the slideshow. It's really not because of the photo. It was actually my husband, who is the photographer for the book, who took the photos. But I mean, Prague itself is just so photogenic that I really do want you to see them. So I'm gonna just try some things here if you want to ask me.
Yeah. So there was a question somebody had that came in is, what are you working on now? Is there any particular thing you're writing or inspired to write about right now?
I'm actually trying to get my second book done, and my publishers had wanted another book on Prague. So it's actually the working title is called Hidden Prague. And it's about the secret stories in Prague that when you're walking the streets, you don't know. Why, for example, in the Old Town Square, is there a jagged wall that has never been fixed? Why is there an extremely strange lamppost in another area of Prague? Where were Gestapo headquarters in Prague? Basically, the things that are just hidden, that you sort of have to move the veil and see what is there. So it's Hidden Prague, and it's about the secrets that are, as I say, hidden in plain sight when you are walking around Prague.
Are there any especially juicy secrets that you've discovered so far?
Juicy in the sense that for me, they've been mind-blowing. Like, there was actually the original church to St. Wenceslas, they only just found 2 years ago. And for me, that was incredible. There's also a wonderful story. If you're in Prague, there's a metronome that sits on top of the Vltava River. And it sits on a pediment that looks like an ancient pagan altar. Why? Because at one time, the largest statue of Stalin in the world once stood there. And the story of why it's there, and the story of how they almost blew up half the city trying to remove that statue, and then why there's a metronome there, is a wonderful story of Prague, and how, even in that book, how history and legend are often quite intertwined.
Ooh, it sounds exciting. We'll have to wait till the next book comes out.
Yeah, if I ever get to
spoil it for anybody, that sounds really awesome.
If I ever get to finish it.
So, have you been? Obviously, you said you went to Prague in the 80s, and you've traveled several times, I'm guessing. Have you gone since the pandemic has lessened a little bit?
I have not. I've been to Prague quite a number of times. I lived there, of course, in 1991. First went in 85 and 86, lived in 91. I've been back a number of times. But the last time that I was in Prague was 2014, and was planning to go out just as the pandemic hit. But, in fact, my husband and I will be going in October of this year.
How long will you be gone?
For just about 15 days.
So you'll be doing some research for the new book.
Yes, that is correct. And, having a little fun as well, but definitely doing a little research for the new book.
So do you read Czech?
I hesitate in answering that. I actually, if I may, I was going to say my people, but that's a colloquialism from my family. From the, Czechoslovakia split peacefully into two countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. And my family was actually from Slovakia. So I can read, the languages are very similar. They probably share maybe 80%, sort of like Norwegian and Swedish. But so I can read some Slovak. Czech is very hard for me, although I can get around. I can read signs and menus and those kinds of things.
So when it comes to doing the research, do you rely on translations then if you're reading something that is written in the original language?
Yes, yes. I can, as I said, I can, if it's in Slovak, which is so close, I can do that. But I do have to rely on translations, or since my speaking ability is much better than my writing, I really like the oral interviews that I get to do.
Oh, nice. So Peter has asked, when you go in October, are you hosting a tour?
A great question. No, I am not, although I have been urged to do that. So maybe sometime in the future that will be the case.
Until then, if you go to Prague, take your book with you.
Yes, please. It can be used as a very good guidebook. Okay, and I'm
I
going to
had
ask one
a friend when I went to Paris who gave me a card deck of so you could build your own tour and then take the cards would fit in your purse, and then you could take the cards out and go in order of what you picked out to do that day. It was super cool.
fascinating. I see. Actually, we're still seeing this wanted. We're seeing them all together, are we not? Can you?
Yes. But maybe you can still talk
deck?
about each one of the pictures and scroll down.
Okay,
We can kind of go that way.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I do not know why. So I will do that if that is okay. We're gonna. I mean, I can't show you as well where we'll be going, but the Charles Bridge, the Old Town, the Jewish Quarter, the New Town, and then we were going to go across the bridge, and we were going to go to the Malostrana or Lesser Town, and then upwards to and through the Castle District to Prague Castle itself. So we're going to start with Charles Bridge. Let's see if I can at least. You can't do that either, but that's the second photo. This is going to be a little difficult even to do this. Because it's not. Okay, hold on. Let's see if we can. Let me go. I'm not going to take it down because I'm afraid to do that. But let's see if I can do this one other. And you're probably still just seeing all of them, right? Terry, you just seeing all the slides?
Yes. So my question is, do you have two screens by chance? That was a question I didn't ask the other day.
No, unfortunately, I do not. I do not. Because I cannot. We're seeing the slides, but I can't. I'm not going to be able to go down. We can see some of them. Maybe let me try one other thing. This is not going to be the best thing, but maybe we can. Okay. Yeah, and it's not. Well, I can at least talk about the first few, but although it's going to be difficult, and I do not understand why we're having these problems.
Yeah, I'm not either. Because it worked the other day when we did it. So
yeah, perfectly so.
Guys.
Well, just let's see if we can just try one more thing here.
I'm wondering, Michelle, if instead of using this view, if you go back to where it says next to file, it says home, like if you scroll through the slides that way, because usually those show up large. Does that make sense? Like if you were going to edit the slides, is what I'm saying, that view.
What are you seeing now?
I'm seeing an individual slide. So
okay. All right. Oh, shoot. You're probably not seeing an individual slide now?
No, we still are. We're seeing maybe the bridge that you were talking about.
Okay, what are you seeing? All right, let's try this. Are you seeing a bridge with a castle above it?
Yes. Okay. And maybe you want to zoom in. I don't know if you can, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a zoom in of your screen in PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's not, unfortunately.
Okay. But we can see an individual picture right now. So
yeah, but I don't think I can move it on because I just moved it on. And what are you seeing right now?
Still the same picture. So it's not. This is interesting. Not had this issue before.
Yeah, it's just not responding. I know there's the... Okay, you're seeing the small picture of the bridge, correct?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to try one more. No, it's not doing that. It does not want to move at all unless I... I've never... This is the 15th virtual presentation I've done, and I've never had this kind of thing happen before.
And I've not had this happen with with our presentation, the one presentation we've done before. So I will have to do some investigating, and I apologize for the issue, Michele.
I do not know what this may be, and I actually keep going in and out just to see if maybe I bring it up one more time. All right, we'll try this once more, because I'm so upset that you cannot see the slides. And there, of course, you're seeing... Are you seeing the whole presentation?
Yeah, when you scroll up and down, we can see you moving through the screen that way.
At least now you can see moving up and down. So at least we have something. So unfortunately, they're smaller, but I'll take you through.
Okay, that's great.
So number 3, the third slide there, that is, of course, the Charles Bridge with Prague Castle looming in the background. And this is Prague's #1 tourist attraction. And if any of you have been on it, say at midday, when you are shoulder to shoulder with thousands of other tourists, you can certainly attest that that is true. But the photos that you're going to see of the bridge, moving to the next one, were taken at about 8 a.m. And it's really the best time to see why the bridge is considered the most beautiful and most romantic bridge in the world. Built in 1357 over the Vltava River, it features those glorious Gothic bridge towers, which I hope you can see, which are considered the finest in Europe. The bridge also has a number of legends associated with it, including one about a young architect that made a pact with the devil to redesign the bridge. Well, as you see, the bridge was never redesigned, and I probably don't need to tell you that things did not turn out so well for the young architect. And you can read that whole story in Haunted Prague. Now, even with the towers and the legends, the most distinguishable feature of the bridge, for which it is famous for, are the 30 stone statues of saints which line both sides. Now, hopefully you can still see it a bit in that photo, even though it's small, which is number 4, and a little bit more in number 5. Now, my favorite statue happens to be this one, slide number 6. And it's the largest statue on the bridge. And it was created to commemorate a Catholic religious order, which was established to ransom Christian slaves from the Turks. And in fact, you can see that little tiny cell at the base of the statue. If you look inside on slide number 7, you can see the slaves languishing there. Now, the reason it's my favorite is that 3 times in the 20th century, in 1945, when Prague was liberated from the Nazis, in 1968, during the brief flowering of freedom known as Prague Spring, and in 1989, at the fall of communism, those bars were ripped away by joyful Praguers. Now, in the next slide, we can again see another statue, hopefully you can see that, with the castle looming above. And from a different vantage point on the bridge, you can actually see, slide number 9, the back of the castle. And although it's hard to make out in such a small slide, way in the back, there's sticking up a tiny gray square tower with a red conical roof. And that's the White Tower. And although you can't see it on this photo being so small, directly below that tower, and you can see it in the next photo, that round tower is called the Daliborka Tower. Now, during the Middle Ages, that tower actually was the castle's dungeon, and it's named for its first inhabitant, Sir Dalibor of Kozoyed. Now, Dalibor's crime was that he had sided with the oppressed serfs against their cruel masters, sort of a Czech version of Robin Hood. Well, for that crime, he was imprisoned in the tower, but he was just left to languish. So, to while away the time, he asked for a violin. And soon, miraculously, the most amazing music was heard floating from his cell window. Well, larger and larger crowds began to gather beneath it, and the magistrates became afraid to move against Dalibor, or at least publicly, because one day the music suddenly stopped, and Dalibor was never heard from again. But even today, Praguers will tell you that on a still summer night, you can still hear the strains of a violin floating above Prague's 7 hills. I tell that story not because it's particularly macabre or gruesome, but because of all the legends of Prague, that is Praguers' favorite. Now, before we finally move on from the bridge, just want to show you the area under it, and that's slide 11. And that is Kampa Island with that beautiful little water wheel. Now, very close to here, very close to the Charles Bridge, a few feet away, in fact, we come to my favorite area of Prague, slide number 12, and that is the Old Town, with its centerpiece being the Old Town Square. It's where I had the privilege of living in 1991. Now, its most important site is that large tower you see in the foreground. That's the tower of the Old Town Hall. And the reason it's so famous is because what it sports on its front, and that is the world-famous astronomical clock. Created in 1490 by a certain Master Hanush, supposedly using supernatural powers. At the top of every hour, those 2 blue squares, they're blue windows, they fly open. As we see on slide 14, a parade of the 12 apostles come past. And that large one with the key is, of course, St. Peter. Now, once the apostles are done their procession, a skeleton representing death rings his bell. Other figures, including a Turk, nod and move. That rooster that you see there flaps its wing and crows. More bells ring, and finally the hour chimes. It really is the best show in town. And if you have any doubt about that, on slide 15, you can see the mobs gathered directly beneath the clock to await the hourly show. I have to note that that gray building in the foreground, it's the closest to us that you hopefully can see. That's actually where I lived in Prague. And I do have to say that the constant tourist noise every hour wasn't so magical, but it was a small price to pay to live in Prague. Now, before we move on, I do just want to take a few moments on this slide. The church that you see in the back with those massive twin towers, each topped by 8 pointed steeples crowned by golden balls, that's Our Lady of Teen. And Praguers will tell you 2 things about this church. One, that it has the resident ghost of a young boy who was murdered by his own father. And 2, that the church provided Walt Disney with his inspiration for Sleeping Beauty's castle. I'll let you take a little longer look at that and see if you agree. Now, to the right of the church, there's a small alley that leads into the back of Our Lady of Teen courtyard. But I would advise you not to go there at night, because you may run into one of Prague's most unfriendly ghosts. It's said that a turbaned Turk in the flowing caftans of the 16th century roams the courtyard at night, carrying a giant golden jewel box in his arms. The Turk was once a resident of Prague, but in a fit of jealousy, he murdered his lover. Overcome with remorse, he quickly fled the city and soon died of remorse. Almost simultaneously, this mysterious turbaned figure was seen in the courtyard every night. Now, if you do ignore my warning and run into him, please don't ask to see what's in the box, because it's the Turk's most prized possession, but it's not a jewel that most people would covet, because inside he carries his lover's head. And it's said that he's always looking out to add another head to his collection from anyone unlucky enough to ask to see the box's contents. Well, I think with that, it's time we come back out into the light. And before we move on from um, the Old Town Square, I just want to note one thing. The other reason I love the square is because it has examples of the three types of architecture for which Prague is justly famous and for which it has more examples than any other city in the world. The first, on slide 15, is the Gothic. You see the Gothic houses below the church. The second, on slide 16, is the Baroque. And finally, on slide 17, the Grand Art Nouveau. But, of course, anywhere you go in the Old Town, you're going to find magnificent vistas. Like on slide 18, great sights like slide 19, and you may even come up upon a legend or two, like in slide 20. Now, slide 20 shows the House of the Golden Well. But what I want you to notice is the crossroads in front of it, because that's where Prague's own headless horseman is said to gallop. You see, he was once a Knights Templar, and we may remember them from the Da Vinci Code, but he was beheaded for treason and heresy in the 14th century. So every night after midnight today, he rides on a great white steed that breathes fire. Under one arm, he clutches his head, and in the other, he carries a great sword. And it's said that anybody who is fast enough or brave enough or strong enough to grab the sword and plunge it through the knight's heart will finally enable him to find peace. Now, interestingly, this ghost is seen more than any other of Prague's spirits. And many people claim they can hear hoofbeats or just feel a presence in the area. I have to admit, I have my own theory. Given the number of tourist pubs in the area, I'm not sure if the number of sightings has more to do with the fantasy of Czech legend or the reality of Czech beer. Now, nestled between that old town and the Vltava River is Prague's Jewish quarter. And in slide 21, we are looking into the Jewish quarter, which contains the remnants of the original Jewish ghetto, the world-renowned Jewish Museum, which has the largest collection of Jewish historical and cultural monuments in the world, and more than anywhere else in the world, or at least in Prague, an almost palpable sense of magic and mystery, of secrets and the golem, or as I said, Prague's own Frankenstein monster, who is said to be slumbering in the attic of this building, slide number 22, which is the old new synagogue. Now, a golem is quite common in Jewish folklore, and it's a creature made of mud or clay that comes to life using magic or the occult. But only Prague's, a giant with fiery red eyes and superhuman strength, has become world famous. Now, he was brought to life by Rabbi Judah Loew, who I told you about a few minutes ago. And he was brought to life to save his people from a pogrom. Well, he managed to accomplish that, but he then became so violent that he couldn't be controlled, so the rabbi imprisoned him in the attic of the synagogue. And if we look at the other side of the synagogue on slide 23, and I know it's virtually impossible to see, but in this very small state, but there is a staircase there that leads to a window that's completely sealed by brick and mortar. And that's called the Stairway to Nowhere. And it's that attic where the golem supposedly slumbers. There's another story that says that during World War II, 2 Nazi officers entered the attic and they were immediately ripped to shreds. Now, while the synagogue is definitely the heart of the Jewish ghetto, its most iconic site is right next door, and that's slide 24. And this is the Old Jewish Cemetery. Now, established in 1439, for 300 years, Jewish people could not be buried anywhere else in Prague. So in an area no larger than 1 city block, you have over 100,000 people buried in layers up to 12 deep. And the cemetery itself is a forest of 12,000 stones covered with moss and age. And as you can tell, they wildly lean over one another, and many are actually halfway in or completely covered by earth. It really is a macabre lunar landscape. And a tourist note, if you want the best photos of the cemetery, well, adjacent to it is the Applied Arts Museum. And the photo that you see here was taken from the women's restroom. And it's the best place to get a photo. Now, of the remaining buildings in the ghetto, there are 6 wonderful synagogues. And I only have pictures of 2 of them here. I think they're the most beautiful. Number 25 is the exterior of the Jubilee or Jerusalem Synagogue. And number 26 is the incredible interior of the Spanish Synagogue. Now, directly south of the Jewish area, we come to the New Town. With its hotels and restaurants and cafes, it's the cosmopolitan heart of Prague. And its centerpiece is Wenceslas Square, where Praguers have traditionally come to celebrate or to protest. The square was also the epicenter of the Velvet Revolution, where the Czechs and their Slovak counterparts brought down one of the most repressive communist regimes in Europe in only 10 days and without so much as breaking a window. Now, the square is headed by the Great National Museum, and in front of it, there is an equestrian statue, slide 28, of good King Wenceslas. Yes, he of the Christmas Carol fame, who happens to be the patron saint of the Czechs. Now, there was a legend that said when the Czech people really needed him, when he had to save them, he would come down from this monument into Wenceslas Square and save his people. Now, interestingly, about halfway down the square, you could have seen it on the other slide, but it's a little too small, there is a balcony from which the leaders of the Velvet Revolution came out every night to lead and inspire the people. Well, their leader was former dissident and future president Václav Havel. Well, interestingly, Václav is the Czech name for Wenceslas. Once again, showing that in Prague, history and legend are often thoroughly intertwined. Now, on that note, I think it's time to jump across the river and go to the lesser town, which is very inappropriately named because it's one of the most picturesque areas of Prague. And among the things it's famous for are what we see in slides 29 and 30, which are these wonderful panoramas. A little too far, sorry about that. There we go. The other thing it's famous for are its gardens. And number 31 shows the Vertba Garden, which is what I mentioned just earlier, Europe's finest Baroque terraced garden. And on 32, we see another shot of the Vertba, and I just love the color of this one. Another garden is the Grand Wallenstein Garden. Now, another thing that the lesser town is known for are quirky streets. And I love this town, this street with the little bridge. There's nothing special about this street, but it just shows you that you never know what you're going to find around any corner in Prague. Now, the last thing that the lesser town is known for is the greatest collection of Baroque buildings in the world, all nestled under Prague's ubiquitous red slate roofs we can see in slide 35, and its scattered green domes. And the dome you see in the background is the largest in Prague, and that's the dome of St. Nicholas on the lesser town square. And on slide 36, you can see that St. Nicholas Church a little better. And I really think in many ways this church defines the panorama of Prague. Now, in the back of slide 36, I realize it's difficult to see, there are twin white towers. And they belong to the Strahov Monastery, which is very near the castle. And you can visit that monastery, and one of the things you can see are the remnants of a dodo bird, proving once again you never know what you're going to find in Prague. Now, slide 37 shows the St. Nicholas Church in its entirety, and this shot was taken from the Vertba Garden. And then here is the beautiful interior of the church, and you can see why it's considered the finest Baroque church north of the Alps. Now, St. Nicholas, from the St. Nicholas Square, or from the St. Nicholas Church on the Lesser Town Square, we begin to travel upward to and through the Castle District. And among the sites that we're going to see along the way, slide number 39, vineyards. And I love the fact that there are vineyards in the center of major European cities. The vineyards lead us to winding Nerudova Street, slide 40. And Nerudova Street is famous for its house signs, which is slide 41. Now, this is the House of the Two Sons. There's also the House of the Green Lobster and the House of the Three Violins. And the house signs were used to find someone before the advent of street or house numbers. Now, Nerudova Street leads directly to the frothy Rococo wedding cake of the Loreto Chapel, with its legend of a widow and her, get this, 27 doomed children. And across the square from the Loreto is the Chernin Palace. And it is the largest palace in Prague, but I include this because it's a wonderful example of the layers of history and legend in Prague. Directly outside of the palace is supposedly a portal to hell, from where good King Wenceslas's mother, Drahomira, was dragged to hell. Drahomira was not so good. She was a pagan and a murderer. Now, when they were excavating to build the palace, they actually did find a pagan cemetery, unique in all of Europe, where all of the skeletons were headless. And until this day, no one knows why. And during the Second World War, this palace was Gestapo headquarters. And I think it shows why almost any building in Prague really is the perfect setting for a ghost tale. Now, a few feet from the Chernin Palace, we come to slide 44, which is the Archbishop's Palace. And then directly past it, finally, our final destination, Prague Castle, or the Hradčany, which is slide 45. And I talked a little bit about this earlier, being the largest castle in the world, inhabited castle in the world with over 1,000 rooms, and its facade stretches more than a half mile. Now, my favorite room in the castle is this one, slide 46, and this is Ladislav Hall. And the reason I love it is two reasons. One, the beautiful fan vaulting that you see there. And two, because this is where indoor jousts were held. So the nobility and royalty wouldn't be bothered by inclement weather. In fact, there are special stairs leading into the room so that the riders wouldn't even have to dismount. Now, my other favorite place in the castle, which really does loom above Prague like a kingdom in the sky, is this charming little lane of houses, which is called the Golden Lane. And that blue one is where Franz Kafka did live for a while. Now, guidebooks and tour guides will tell you that this is where the castle's alchemists lived. Well, as I noted about King or Emperor Rudolph II, the castle definitely had alchemists, but they didn't live here. This is where the castle's archers lived. And scholars pretty much now agree that the reason it was called the Golden Lane is because during the Middle Ages, the castle's sewer system ran through here. I guarantee you won't hear that from any tour guide in Prague. Now, finally, at the castle summit, yes, there we see the front of the Grand St. Vitus Cathedral. And I'm just going to move on because I know that Terry showed you the side view. It's just a little bit different side view of the tower. Now, as I said, its interior is justly famous for its stained glass. And slide 50 shows you the area behind the high altar called the Corona. And another window, and sorry you can't see the detail, slide 51, this is a window that shows scenes from the life of St. Wenceslas. And it was created by the greatest of all Art Nouveau artists, the Czech, Alphonse Mucha. Now, the window is directly across the church, or the cathedral, from probably the most sacred spot in Prague, where that national saint and the national spirit are buried. See, slide 52 shows you the chapel of St. Wenceslas. And although Wenceslas was a good and pious and courageous ruler, his pagan brother coveted the throne and had him murdered. His remains are kept in that small house-like structure in the middle of the photo. And beyond that is that door that I spoke about, which leads to the Bohemian crown jewels. And finally, at least we can finally see on slide number 53, that crown of St. Wenceslas, from which the legend of the cursed crown and the Reichsprotector comes from. And with that was where I was going to say, I think it's time. One last look, that balloon floating over a stream on Kampa Island, to end our virtual tour of Haunted Prague. So I hope, even though it was hard to see some of that, I hope that you enjoyed going through. So Terry, I will turn things back over to you and stop sharing my screen.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking us on that tour. I've read so many fiction books, historical fiction books set in Prague, and that was probably before the age of the internet. I was reading those books. I've never thought to look it up and look at pictures. It's beautiful. And the church that you shared at the end reminds me of the church I grew up going to at home with the soaring windows. The biggest windows in my church back home were, I think, over 21 feet tall.
Yep, they're amazing, and I'm
sorry. Where I come from, there's a strong Czech population and connection to Bohemia. There's probably a reason there are windows that big in the church.
the finest glass and crystal makers in Europe. And again, I'm sorry, I actually did try, clicking on every slide to bring it, and that would not do it either. I'm believing it was just Haunted tonight. So I'm at least hoping that with the stories and the history and the legends, and at least, if not being able to see the detail, at least you could see sort of the glory of Prague in a little bit of a miniaturized setting. As I said,
all the places are in your book, so people could buy the book and see the pictures up close and hear more of the stories that you shared. My jaw dropped when you said 27 children.
Yeah, I know. And they all were doomed. They all died one after another.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, a lot of the legends are a little dark, but that's one that unfortunately is a little darker than most of the legends in the book.
So I'm just going to say one last call for questions. We're a little bit over our time, but I wanted to give Michele as much time to share her presentation. So we were having tech difficulties. We have no idea what was causing that. Internet gremlins, ghosts, whatever it might be. So I have a couple more questions for Michele. Now, you said in your bio you're an avid traveler. What are some of your other favorite places to visit other than Prague?
Well, and see, I have, of course, given my background, but one of my favorites is its neighbor, Slovakia. And one of the reasons I love Slovakia, it's a beautiful country. It has the smallest alpine range of mountains in the world, so very easy to see. 3 mountain ranges, glorious villages where folklore customs are still alive, more castles than any other country in the world. But at the same time, it has Western standards of infrastructure and such. But with the possible exception of the capital, Bratislava, it hasn't been discovered yet. So you can really enjoy seeing this beautiful country without the tourist hordes everywhere.
I'm going to ask a question that isn't on my list that I had because I am such a foodie when it comes to travel. What are some of your favorite, traditional Czech or Slovak foods to eat when you're over there?
Well, in Czech or Slovakia, the same word. They also, in Poland, they use the same word, kolache, which are, the wonderful, I think a lot of people, the wonderful Czech pastries, which are sort of a yeasty pastry with fruit in the center, traditionally either poppy seed or walnut or apricot or prune. Another dish is halušky, which my husband calls Slovak macaroni and cheese. And think of very, very, very tiny potato dumplings. But I mean, they're very, very tiny. They're smaller than, say, gnocchi. And they're smothered in a traditional Slovak sheep cheese, which is brinsta. And then on top, bacon flecks. And it is, in fact, the national dish of Slovakia. So it's something that I very much look forward to. And the other thing I have to note, and I really am not a drinker, but there is a liquor in Slovakia called, you understand why I love this, Tatra tea. And the base of it is, yes, tea. And there's a citrus one, and I'm forgetting the other flavors now. But if you're ever in Slovakia, you have to try Tatra tea.
I want to make a trip there now. Sounds amazing. And I don't know if I shared this when we first spoke, was that my family, despite having roots in Bohemia and Germany, are in Poland. None of that came to America with them. So I don't know any traditional dishes. It's all stuff that I've discovered living here in Cedar Rapids from that standpoint. So I find it, I love asking those questions about the food too, for that reason.
It's wonderful. My husband and I actually, for the first time, we did the traditional 9-course Slovak Christmas Eve dinner this year. So it was quite something.
Oh my gosh. Sounds amazing, actually. So it doesn't look like we have any more questions. There are a lot of people saying they really enjoyed this tonight. It's been delightful. They thank you so much for your time. And I know that you I have a couple more questions for you, and I do want to do, because we said we wanted to do the Inside the Actor Studio quick fire questions, because those are always fun. But one of the questions that I love asking as well is, what is one thing you wish people would ask you about, whether it's related to your books or anything else in your life? And please share that with us.
Only because it was something that I wondered about for years, because I had heard authors talk about it, was that, do characters really take on a life of their own? And there was a book and a movie out about 5 years ago called The Man Who Invented Christmas, about Dickens writing A Christmas Carol, and how he keeps arguing with his characters. And I have to admit that's true. If you really get to know your characters, and if you are genuine about them, if you allow them to do what they're supposed to do, it's sort of like having a child or a spouse or a friend who you know is going to do A, B, and C. There was one story in my book called Jan and the Architect, where at one point I'm needing to take him back up the hill to get to the king, and he just wouldn't go. I know that sounds, I'm trying to get him to go, but he had to do A and B and C first, because that was true to his nature. And so characters really can propel the story forward in very odd ways if you are being true to your characters. It's amazing how they will force you to write in certain ways.
That's an amazing thing to share. I've heard that from so many authors as well. So it's great to know that you've experienced that as well, telling these stories and sharing the history of Prague. So here are my quick fire questions. What is your favorite book?
Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So do you like the movie adaptation?
Yes, I did. Awesome. I really did like it. I think it's one of the few movies that I believe, great book, great movie.
That's good to know, because that's always a worry of mine. Now you've done a lot of different things in your life. You're an author. You've been a speechwriter. What profession other than your own that you've had would you like to attempt?
Stand-up comedian.
Sounds like that sounds fun, actually. Mm-hmm. We already know the question is, you are a tea drinker versus a coffee drinker. Mm-hmm. Dogs or cats?
I'm sorry, bunnies.
Oh my goodness. Do you have a bunny, or have you had bunnies?
In the past, and my mother also had them as well. But so I have to say bunnies.
Oh, I've not heard that before. That's amazing. Love it. This is a question that's always tricky. Toilet paper, does it go over or under?
Over. Sorry.
I asked one author that, and he didn't know the answer, but his wife was on the chat and gave us the answer. So when it comes to books, do you prefer physical books, electronic books, or audio, or it doesn't make a difference? You read them all.
I like physical books. There's something about the tactile nature. It's why I write first in longhand before actually putting on the computer. There's something about that tactile nature. So definitely physical.
I still, when I have meetings, I often have a notebook by me. It's something about that physical active writing it down that makes it stick better than typing it out in a list first.
Mm-hmm.
And my final question for this evening, Michele, is if heaven exists, what would you like to hear when you cross over? Or will you stay here and haunt the world?
No, I want to cross over, and I want to hear St. Peter tell me, we all love your book up here.
That's awesome. I love it. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Michele. And I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I enjoyed all of your stories, and it was wonderful to chat with you. And I hope that you and your husband get to come to Cedar Rapids again sometime soon, and maybe we can meet in person.
I would love that. I've made a lot of friends out there, and I know the National Czechoslovak Museum wants me back too. So next time, we'll definitely make it out to the Swamp Fox bookstore.
Yes, please let us know when you're in town next week. Could you get together and have tea or have dinner together?
Yes, or kolaches.
Yes, I know there's some bakeries in town that can provide those, so definitely that would be on the docket. So thank you again for your time tonight, Michele, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everyone. You too have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.